There was no sign of forced entry. It was somebody that she either knew or recognised. Chris Jeffries had a conversation that same afternoon with Greg, and he would have known that she was going to be there on her own that weekend. He was landlord of the premises, and we know he had a spare key.
Chris Jeffries is interesting the media. They'd heard he may have changed his original statement to the police. He meets a reporter at the doorstep.
He didn't immediately recognise that I was the person he was after, but as soon as he did realise that, he rather excitedly walked down the drive with me.
Are you able to give us any detail of what it was you told them?
I'm afraid not, no.
And the only person who had any business asking questions that I might be in a position to answer were the police, which I made pretty clear to the reporters, probably in a slightly exasperated way.
I'm not prepared to make any comments to the media.
So you didn't see her that evening?
I certainly cannot say that I saw Joanna Yeates that evening, no.
Thank you very much.
Christopher Jeffries had not changed his statement. He had added to it. He was trying to be helpful, but had become a person of interest to the police.
I believe I had reasonable grounds to arrest Chris Jeffries.
So I opened the door and was immediately confronted by two detectives who showed their ID, who announced, "We're arresting you on suspicion of the murder of Jo Yeates."
Vincent Tabak is online following every detail of the case whilst in Holland. He now offers police remarkable new evidence.
One thing he did do was make contact with the police while he was out of the country.
And at 10 o'clock that morning, Vincent Tabak and his girlfriend made a telephone call
to explain that he had remembered that his landlord's motor car had apparently changed direction overnight.
He rang up with information stating that on the evening of the 17th of December, the person in custody who had a car parked to the rear of that premises in the communal parking area, 44 Canning Road, their car had moved. That was significant for me as a senior investigator, and he knew the relevance of that.
The bookish bachelor Christopher Jeffries was unaware that Tabak had incriminated him. Mr. Jeffries was now in custody being interrogated.
I was invited to admit that on the particular Friday evening on which Jo was thought to have disappeared, I had gone round to her flat. I had let myself in because as a landlord I had a key, and that everything had then escalated from that point.
The car that Vincent Tabak had said Chris Jeffries must have driven the night that Jo went missing was painstakingly searched for forensic evidence.
It was so intense as to be quite numbing.
Jeffries had said that he'd stayed in Reading that night. Had he lied?
All the possessions that I had with me were taken away.
His prized possessions, his books, were taken by police.
I remember saying, "What evidence do you have?"
Friends organised legal support as he underwent 3 days of questioning and spent nights in a cell. His way of life was snatched from him.
I might have begun emotionally to break down. The conditions of being held in a police station are extremely stressful.
But Christopher Jeffries was an innocent man. He was released without charge, so Jo's killer was still at large.
Towards the end of the questioning, when it became clear that the police were not going to be able to find any evidence at all to charge me, then I did start to think, well, a lot of time has been wasted on an innocent person. whoever was responsible for Joe's disappearance and murder is still on the loose and remains a danger to the public.
The public in Holland was only vaguely aware of the story. Bristol police knew that the man who offered damning but false evidence against Chris Jeffries had been alone in Canning Road the night that Joe disappeared.
So I sent a team, 2 investigators out to the Netherlands to speak to him and his girlfriend as a witness, to capture that information because I felt that was crucial to my investigation.
At that meeting, one thing the police officers asked for was a voluntary DNA sample from Vincent Tabak. He was somewhat reluctant to do so, sufficiently reluctant for the officer who took the sample actually to phone the incident room in Bristol and report that reluctance as being something that concerned her. It wasn't quite right.
Vincent Tabak was now very much a person of interest to the police.
It wasn't until the officers returned from the Netherlands and they spoke to Vincent Tabak on New Year's Eve that Karen Thomas, the officer that spoke to Vincent Tabak and took the statement from him, raised some concerns.
Those concerns related to Tabak's movements on the evening of December 17th, but more evidence was emerging.
The police, having had his DNA sample obtained voluntarily in Holland and checked against findings on Joe's body, discovered that his DNA was on her body. And that was one of the key factors that led to the planned arrest of him in later January.
There was one man in England who thought the likeable Vincent Tabak could not possibly be guilty, his landlord.
When Vincent was arrested, I was very surprised indeed, because he certainly didn't strike me as somebody who I would suspect, and I had some concern for him because I was worried that perhaps the police had made another mistake and somebody else had been unjustly taken into custody. And I could imagine the same thing happening to him as